There's these ways that we can identify with narrative, thought, or emotion, but there can also be, in this attitude of being in the front row seat and looking fresh, we can see, oh, there's all this content of experience, but there's not fundamentally an experiencer if you look really closely. And so that's a great step with the emotional self. Just recognizing that there's emotions present, but they need not define who and what you are. And I have to tell you that I became most intimately familiar with this during menopause. And I was talking to a friend who went through menopause a couple years before me one day, and she said something that I found fascinating. And it's not about whether you believe what I'm about to say or not, but it's certainly something to think on or consider. She said, as I've been going through menopause, I've been really looking at all these emotional feelings that come up that are unfamiliar to me. Women can get weepy more often, or irritable more often, or anxious more often, or just different emotional qualities can come up in much stronger ways during that time of life. Not always, but sometimes. And she said, I was looking at all these emotions that just kept coming up that seemed so unfamiliar. And she said, I really am starting to think that emotions are hormones, or hormones are emotions. And I immediately knew what she meant, because it can really feel often like, whether we call it hormones or brain chemistry or the chemistry of emotions, the energetics of emotions, they have very specific imprints, and they this ecosystem of our inner beings, minds, and bodies, it can kind of cook up specific constellations of things, and in this case, emotions, and those constellations kind of have familiar imprints that we tend to name. Oh, this kind of stuck, like aggravated feeling, we call this frustration, or but we might look a little closer. Maybe we just call it stagnation, or we might look at something like anxiety a little closer, and sometimes it can look a little vacuous or empty and shaky, or more chaotic, and so there's these imprints of the way energy constellates, and we tend to label them in certain ways, as, like I'm saying, frustration or anxiety. And then we might even further label and say, I am anxious, I am frustrated. And then we might even further sort of cook up these narratives where we just start to live in this atmosphere of those emotions and very much identify with them. And, maybe start to feed narratives. And what I was really looking at during menopause, which I've come through, but what I really looked at is how the ecosystem can present as a certain emotion. And then it's fascinating to see how our thinking minds can sometimes search the data banks of our experience. At least this has happened to me. Like, oh, I feel really sad right now because I had a lot of kind of more weepy types of experiences during menopause. And I think, wow, I feel really sad right now. And I think, oh, what's making me sad? And I could see this searching and seeking for the right story of what has unfolded most recently in my life that I must be sad about. I thought, look at that. There's this ecosystem, and then the thinking mind tries to build context around that, because it loves to have some sense of context or understanding and kind of ongoing narrative that it can, because it likes to rest in the fact that it knows what's going on, or it knows what's happening, so that it can respond well. And so that's what thought tends to like to do. And so I thought, look at that, how you can have a felt sensation, felt emotion. It can very quickly begin to attach to a narrative, and it can even attach to an identity. And so, in response to this person's question, we can have this opportunity to kind of throw all that in reverse. Oh, I don't have to make these conclusions about what I'm feeling. And as she said toward the end of her, what she wrote in, is it about watching and sitting? Excuse me, I can't quite see without my glasses. Watching and sitting and being with it. In this case, she's talking about the heartbreak or the emotional self. So we can kind of peel off the narrative if that feels possible in a given moment. Maybe in a given moment it's more difficult, but after we go for a walk, or who knows, have a nap or somehow reset, then sit down and meditate and just kind of let all of the stormy skies settle. And the energies in our mind and body tend to settle together. As the body settles, the mind settles. And so we can do these activities that help reset things, and we can peel off these stories, identities, and we can begin to get closer to the felt sense. And this is where the qualities of our essential being, which include that front row seat, that fresh perspective, that looking anew, that curiosity, that comes in handy, as well as this sense of being that has this sense of what has always been, who and what we are that has always been, this kind of constancy, this sense in ourself of the you that has been present throughout your whole life, bearing witness to your whole life and inhabiting your life.